The 14 main events of Christ's Passion. Today, we will delve into the 14 main events of Christ's Passion. These moments are not only pillars of the Christian faith but also eternal lessons of love and sacrifice. Join us on this spiritual journey. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's begin. Number 14. Jesus is condemned to death. In the darkness before dawn, the air in Jerusalem was charged with tension and ominous signs. Jesus of Nazareth, having been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, was brought before the Sanhedrin, where false witnesses rose against him. However, it was his own confession of being the Messiah, the Son of God, that sealed his fate in the eyes of the Jewish religious leaders. Declared guilty of blasphemy but lacking the Roman authority to execute the death sentence, the Sanhedrin took Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, in search of a fatal verdict. Pilate found himself at a crossroads of political pressures and his own skepticism about the charges against Jesus. Upon interrogating Jesus, Pilate found no basis for the accusations of treason against the Roman Empire. Seeking a way out that would appease the crowd without having the blood of an innocent on his hands, Pilate offered to release Jesus as part of the Passover tradition, hoping the crowd would choose Jesus over Barabbas, a notorious insurrectionist. However, instigated by the religious leaders, the crowd chose Barabbas. Pilate, in a final effort to avoid execution, ordered Jesus to be flogged, hoping this punishment would satisfy the bloodlust. Jesus was scourged, a brutal process that left the condemned in extreme weakness and pain. After the flogging, Roman soldiers wove a crown of thorns and placed it on him, mocking him as the King of the Jews. Despite these actions, the crowd and religious leaders continued to clamor for his crucifixion. Confronted with increasing turmoil and veiled threats of being reported to Caesar as an accomplice to treason for not punishing a rival king, Pilate yielded. Washing his hands in a symbolic act of distancing himself from Jesus' blood, Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified. The sentence was pronounced. Jesus would be executed on the cross, the most cruel and humiliating form of execution reserved by the Romans for slaves, insurrectionists, and the most despised criminals. With the sentence pronounced, the journey to Calvary, also known as Golgotha, the place of the skull, began. Jesus, weakened by the scourging and mistreatment, was forced to carry the heavy wooden cross along the narrow streets of Jerusalem to the place of his execution. The crowd lined the path, some weeping for him, while others insulted and mocked him. Number 13. Jesus carries the cross. With the first light of day struggling to pierce the veil of clouds over Jerusalem, Jesus of Nazareth, already weakened by the wounds of his scourging and the scorn of those he came to save, faced a new torment. The cross, an instrument of torture and humiliation, designed not only to punish the body but also to break the spirit, was placed upon him. This cross, made of heavy, rough wood, symbolized the burden of all humanity's sins, a weight now resting on the lacerated shoulders of Jesus. The route to Golgotha stretched before Jesus, a path cruelly designed to prolong suffering and maximize public ridicule. The crowd, a mix of the curious, devout, grief-stricken, and mockers, thronged the narrow streets, some moved by helpless compassion, others by mockery and disdain. With each step, the weight of the cross sunk deeper into Jesus' wounds, each fall a reminder of the vulnerable humanity he had chosen to assume. The journey to Calvary was a via crucis in itself, a prelude to the culmination of Jesus' sacrifice. Each step, marked by pain and humiliation, was also a step towards fulfilling a divine promise, the promise of redemption and salvation. On this path, Jesus not only carried the wooden cross, he bore upon himself the weight of our transgressions, our weaknesses, and through his suffering, opened a path to reconciliation and hope. Number 12. Jesus falls for the first time. The road to Calvary, paved and narrow, was a via crucis not only physically but spiritually. Jesus, bearing the weight of the cross and humanity's sins, struggled forward. His body, lacerated by the whip and weakened by fasting and distress, could barely stand. And then it happened. Amid the tumult, the cries of the crowd, and the relentless Judean sun, Jesus fell. This first fall under the weight of the cross is a moment of profound humanization for Jesus. It reveals his vulnerability and suffering, reminding us that, though divine, he fully assumed the human condition with all its limitations and pains. Jesus' fall is not just the result of his weakened physical state. It also symbolizes the overwhelming weight of our faults and failures, a weight he chose to carry out of love for us. In this moment, Jesus' mission is fully revealed in its sacrificial dimension, showing his willingness to endure not only extreme physical pain but also the spiritual weight of humanity's separation from God due to sin. In the midst of his suffering, Jesus does not lose his capacity to look upon those around him with love and compassion. His fall, far from being a sign of weakness, is a manifestation of his immense spiritual strength and unwavering commitment to humanity. In this act of falling, Jesus teaches us about resilience, humility, and the true greatness that emerges not from power and domination but from sacrifice and unconditional love. Jesus' fall can be seen as a moment of silence, a brief parenthesis in the clamor of the Via Crucis, eloquently speaking of the path of redemption he is paving. In this silence lies an invitation to reflect on our own fragility and the need for redemption we all share. The true measure of this moment lies not only in the fall but in Jesus rising again. With assistance or by his own will, Jesus stands up once more, determined to continue his journey to Calvary. This act of rising is a powerful testimony to the hope Jesus offers. No matter how heavy the burden or how great the fall, there is always the possibility of redemption, of rising and moving forward. Number 11. Jesus meets his mother. On the tortuous path to Calvary, marked by suffering and humiliation, a moment of profound human and divine sorrow occurs. Jesus meets his mother, Mary. This encounter, though not explicitly mentioned in all the Gospels, has been immortalized in Christian tradition as one of the most emotive stations of the Via Crucis. It represents not only the unconditional love of a mother for her son but also the universality of human suffering. Mary, who accepted her role in the history of salvation with an unconditional yes, now faces the unimaginable pain of seeing her son led to sacrifice. This meeting between mother and son is a moment of communion in suffering. Mary shares in the mystery of Christ's passion, becoming a symbol for all who suffer and mourn for their loved ones. Mary's presence on Jesus' path to Calvary is a testament to maternal love that endures even in the face of the greatest tragedies. The exchange of glances between Jesus and Mary is a wordless dialogue, charged with love, pain, and mutual acceptance of the divine will. In this brief encounter, Jesus finds comfort in his mother's face, a source of strength to continue his path of sacrifice. Mary, for her part, despite her deep suffering, offers Jesus silent support, reaffirming her faith in her son's salvific mission. Number 10. Simon of Cyrene helps Jesus carry the cross. As Jesus laboriously advanced toward Calvary, his physical strength waned under the unbearable weight of the cross and the exhaustion from his prior torture. At this critical moment, when it seemed Jesus might not be able to continue, an unexpected figure appears in the narrative of the Passion, Simon of Cyrene. This man, who by chance was passing by, was compelled by Roman soldiers to carry Jesus' cross. Simon, initially an unwitting bystander, becomes an integral part of this journey toward sacrifice. The imposition of the cross on Simon was not just an act of pragmatism by the Roman soldiers, eager to ensure that Jesus reached the place of his crucifixion, but it also symbolizes the invitation to every human being to participate in the way of the cross. By helping Jesus carry his burden, Simon of Cyrene becomes the prototype of discipleship, teaching us the importance of sharing the burdens of others, especially those who are suffering and marginalized. For Simon, this encounter was transformative. What began as an imposed burden turned into a profound and meaningful act of service. Through this act of assistance, Simon experienced an intimate connection with Jesus, physically sharing the weight of his redemptive mission. This moment reminds us that, often, it is through service and sacrifice for others that we find our deepest path to understanding and divine love. Number 9. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. Amidst the crowd that followed Jesus on his way to Calvary, a woman makes her way through with a gesture of deep humanity and compassion. Veronica, moved by compassion at the sight of Jesus, covered in sweat, blood, and dust, approaches him with a cloth to wipe his face. This act, simple in its execution but immense in its significance, stands out as a beacon of light in the darkness of the Via Crucis. Veronica, in this gesture, stands as a symbol of kindness and mercy that defies cruelty and indifference. The cloth with which Veronica wipes the face of Jesus is left imprinted with the image of his face, a miracle that serves as a testimony to his holiness and suffering, but also to divine gratitude and recognition towards acts of kindness and bravery. This encounter between Veronica and Jesus not only momentarily alleviates Christ's physical suffering but also offers spiritual consolation, showing that love and compassion can still be found even in the most desperate moments. The tradition of Veronica and her veil has become a powerful symbol within Christianity, representing unshakable faith and devotion. Through her act of compassion, Veronica teaches us that following Christ means acting with love towards others, especially in times of greatest need. Her story is a reminder that, despite fear or adversity, we are called to be witnesses of faith and love in action. Number 8. Jesus falls the second time. After the brief respite granted by Veronica's act of compassion, Jesus continues his painful journey towards Calvary. The weight of the cross, combined with the brutality of his prior flagellation, tests the limits of his human endurance. It is in this context of extreme exhaustion and pain that Jesus experiences his second fall. This moment marks not only a repetition of Christ's physical vulnerability but also a profound spiritual symbolism. The second fall of Jesus under the weight of the cross is emblematic of the recurring nature of human sin and our tendency to fall again and again, despite our best intentions. In this act of falling again, Jesus symbolizes his solidarity with humanity, taking on not just the physical weight of the cross but also the spiritual weight of our repeated faults and failures. This moment of the Passion offers a powerful lesson on perseverance and resilience. Jesus' second fall emphasizes the importance of getting up after each failure, reminding us that the path to redemption and grace is often marked by obstacles and setbacks. Through his example, Jesus teaches us that holiness is not found in the absence of falls but in the willingness to continue moving forward, trusting in God's love and mercy. Number 7. Jesus consoles the women of Jerusalem. As Jesus continues his painful walk towards Calvary, a group of women from Jerusalem, moved by compassion and sorrow at the sight of his suffering, weep for him. In this moment of profound vulnerability and agony, Jesus, despite the immensity of his own suffering, stops to address them. This encounter reveals Jesus' deep empathy and concern not just for his own situation but for the suffering of all. Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Jesus says, offering a perspective that looks beyond his immediate suffering to the future tribulations they would face. This moment is deeply moving, reflecting Jesus' constant concern for the spiritual and temporal well-being of others, even on the way to his own death. Jesus warns the women about the difficult days to come, urging them to reflect on the depth of their faith and the strength of their spirit in times of trial. This act of consolation towards the women is not just a gesture of compassion but also an invitation to introspection and conversion. Jesus, on his way to sacrifice, continues teaching, showing that love and concern for others must prevail even in the darkest moments. Number 6. Jesus falls the third time. Continuing his way to Calvary, Jesus experiences his most devastating fall. This third and final fall under the weight of the cross occurs near the place of his crucifixion. At this point, Jesus' strength is nearly exhausted, and the weight of the cross, along with the weight of the human suffering it symbolizes, seems to surpass the limits of human endurance. This fall is not just physical but also deeply spiritual, reflecting the magnitude of the sacrifice he is about to complete. This third fall of Jesus symbolizes the culmination of his physical and spiritual suffering. By falling again, Jesus demonstrates the extent of his vulnerability and humanity. Through this act, Jesus teaches us that even in moments of greatest weakness and despair, there is dignity and purpose. His perseverance in the face of unimaginable adversity is a testament to his unbreakable love for humanity and his commitment to the mission of salvation entrusted by the Father. The third fall is also a powerful call to resilience and faith. Through this moment, Jesus shows us that the path of faith can be fraught with difficulties and may require us to rise again and again, despite the falls. Jesus' determination to move forward, even when his body and spirit are at their limit, inspires us to persevere in our own struggles, trusting that God will give us the strength to overcome our trials. By falling for the third time, Jesus also deepens his solidarity with all who suffer. This fall reminds us that there is no human suffering that Jesus does not understand or share. In his way to the cross, Jesus experienced the depth of human pain, becoming fully one with us in our suffering. This union in suffering is a source of comfort and hope, assuring us that we are not alone in our struggles. Number 5. Jesus is stripped of his garments. Upon reaching the place of crucifixion, an act of humiliation precedes the final sacrifice. Jesus is stripped of his garments. This moment represents not only extreme physical vulnerability but also a symbolic exposure of the human being in the face of adversity and judgment. Being stripped of his clothing, Jesus faces a final form of disgrace in the eyes of the world, an act that underscores his total self-surrender. In this act of being stripped, Jesus teaches us a profound paradox. In vulnerability lies an unbreakable strength. By facing this humiliation without resistance, Jesus manifests a fortitude that does not derive from worldly power or authority but from the authenticity and truth of his mission. This vulnerability revealed to the world is a testimony to the total submission to the Father's will and an act of pure love for humanity. Jesus' stripping also carries a message of material and spiritual detachment. At this moment, Jesus sheds all earthly attachments, inviting us to reflect on what we truly value and what we cling to in our lives. It calls us to consider the importance of letting go of those attachments that prevent us from fully living our faith and following the path he has marked. This act of stripping also symbolizes Jesus' preparation for his final sacrifice on the cross. By being stripped of his garments, Jesus is presented before humanity and God in his most pure and vulnerable form, ready to offer the supreme sacrifice of love. This moment reminds us that, before God, we all present ourselves naked, without masks or adornments, called to offer our hearts open and sincere. Despite the extreme humiliation of being stripped before a crowd, Jesus maintains his unalterable dignity. This act, far from diminishing his stature, elevates his redemptive mission to its highest point. Jesus shows us that true dignity does not reside in our possessions or how the world sees us, but in our identity as beloved children of God and in our ability to love unconditionally, even in the most difficult circumstances. Number 4. Jesus is nailed to the cross. Upon arriving at the place of his crucifixion, Jesus is subjected to the final act of his earthly passion, being nailed to the cross. This moment represents the climax of his sacrifice, the point at which Christ's unconditional love for humanity is manifested in its most extreme form. The nails piercing his hands and feet are both literal and symbolic, representing the wounds that sin inflicts on the human spirit and the extent to which Jesus is willing to go to redeem us. The sound of the hammer striking the nails echoes through history, reminding us of the price of love and redemption. In this act of being nailed to the cross, Jesus gives his life in a supreme act of love and obedience to the Father. Through this sacrifice, he offers himself as the pure lamb, whose blood is shed for the forgiveness of the world's sins. It is an act of love so profound that it transcends human understanding, inviting us to contemplate the nature of divine love. Jesus' crucifixion is not just a moment of intense physical suffering, it is also a deeply spiritual act. On the cross, Jesus experiences the weight of sin and separation from God, a pain that surpasses all physical understanding. This moment of anguish, however, is also an act of redemption. In his suffering, Jesus paves the way for humanity to be reconciled with God, showing that even in the deepest pain, there can be purpose and hope. By being nailed to the cross, Jesus fully identifies with the human condition in its most vulnerable aspect. He shows us that there is no suffering he has not shared, no pain he does not understand. This solidarity in suffering is a source of comfort for all who bear their own crosses, reminding us that we are not alone in our struggles and that God's love is present even in moments of greatest despair. Number 3. Jesus dies on the cross. After hours of agony, suspended between heaven and earth, the moment comes when Jesus breathes his last on the cross. This instant marks the culmination of his sacrifice, an act of unparalleled love for humanity. It is finished, Jesus says, signaling the completion of his redemptive mission. Jesus' death on the cross is a turning point in the history of salvation, the moment when the ultimate sacrifice for the sin of the world is offered. At the moment of his death, the earth darkens, and the veil of the temple is torn in two, symbolizing not only the mourning of creation at the death of its creator but also the opening of a new path to God. This moment of darkness and silence envelops the world, reflecting the depth of the sacrifice made and the magnitude of the loss. Jesus' death on the cross, while a moment of great sadness and reflection, is also the act that brings new life. Through this sacrifice, Jesus conquers sin and death, offering everyone the chance for redemption and eternal life. This act of unconditional love and total surrender is the source of our hope and the foundation of our faith. Number 2. Jesus is taken down from the cross and given to his mother. The death of Jesus on the cross leaves a silence and solemnity that envelop Golgotha. The next act in this sacred drama is the descent of Jesus from the cross. With care and reverence, his lifeless body is lowered, an image immortalized in art and devotion throughout the centuries. This moment represents not only the physical end of Christ's passion but also the beginning of the mourning process and reflection on the meaning of his sacrifice. In this moment of profound grief and loss, Mary, the mother of Jesus, receives the body of her son. The image of Mary holding Jesus taken down from the cross is one of the most powerful and emotive representations of the Passion, known as the Pietà. This encounter between mother and son symbolizes unconditional love, sacrifice, and shared suffering. Through Mary, all believers are invited to contemplate the cost of divine love and the reality of human suffering. The act of taking Jesus down from the cross and delivering him to his mother is also a moment of profound compassion and solidarity. Those who participate in this act, Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, and the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee, show their loyalty and love for Jesus, even in death. This moment reminds us of the importance of community and the comfort we can offer and receive in times of greatest need. Although this moment is marked by sadness and mourning, it also carries within it a promise of hope. The delivery of Jesus' body to his mother is not the end of the story. Even in death, the promise of resurrection shines as a light of hope, reminding us that God's love has the power to transform even the deepest darkness into a new morning of joy and resurrection. Number 1. Jesus is buried. After being taken down from the cross and given to his mother, Jesus' body is prepared for burial. Joseph of Arimathea, who had requested Jesus' body from Pilate, provides his own new tomb, hewn from rock, for the burial. With respect and reverence, Jesus' body is wrapped in a clean shroud and laid in the tomb. This moment marks the fulfillment of the scriptures and the end of the earthly events of Christ's passion, but also presages the mystery of the resurrection. The burial of Jesus is a moment of profound silence and reflection. The silence of the tomb invites contemplation on the meaning of death and the hope of life that overcomes death. This act of burial, carried out in haste before the start of the Sabbath, bears witness to the fidelity of his followers to Jewish laws and their love and respect for Jesus to the end. The burial of Jesus is also an act of loyalty in a moment of desolation and apparent defeat. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, along with the women who had followed Jesus, demonstrate unbreakable loyalty, risking their safety and position to honor Jesus in his death. This loyalty in the darkest moments is a powerful reminder of the importance of staying true to our commitments and beliefs, even when hope seems lost. The act of burial, though signaling the end of Jesus' earthly life, is not the end of the story. The sealed tomb becomes the stage for the next divine act, the resurrection. This moment of burial carries within it the seed of hope, reminding us that God acts beyond our expectations and that death does not have the last word. The promise of the resurrection is the cornerstone of the Christian faith, offering hope and renewal to all who face darkness and desolation. The burial of Jesus closes the chapter on his passion and death but also opens the door to hope and the promise of the resurrection. In this final act of love and sacrifice, we are invited to contemplate the mystery of the Christian faith, that through death comes life, and that in total self-giving, Jesus has shown us the way to salvation and eternal life. The story continues, and with the resurrection, we are offered a vision of life that triumphs over death.